Welcome to the CIDDL Research and Practice Brief series. My name is Nicholas Hoekstra. The purpose of the Research and Practice Brief series is to have conversations around the innovative use of technology in special education, early childhood education, related services, and leadership personnel preparation programs. Today, we have with us Cynthia Curry, Director of Technical Assistance at CAST and Program Director at the National Center on Accessible Educational Materials, the AIM Center, to talk with us a little around her research and practice around accessible educational materials and standards. So welcome, Cynthia.
Great, thanks, Nick. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for the invitation.
So to start with, could you tell us a little bit about your work around the integration of technology to promote universal design for learning and inclusive education, and perhaps a little about how this applies to teacher preparation and what are some of the main issues you are trying to address?
Sure. So to the first question about how we approach accessibility and technology through a universal design for learning lens, because it's CAST, it's really the foundation for our approach to technical assistance to support improved provision and supportive use for accessible materials and technologies really across the lifespan. So not just K-12, but as the shared focus is early childhood of our two centers, as well as higher education and workforce development. So we're really looking at accessibility within UDL settings and improving settings so that they're more universally designed, really from early childhood through post-secondary. And we look at UDL through an accessibility infused lens by looking at really the first row. If you're looking at the UDL guidelines, there are three different levels. The first is access. So in order for individuals who access information, materials, technology in highly varied ways, really the entry into a UDL framework is to make sure that everybody can engage with those materials. So recruiting interest, for example, and making sure that choice and autonomy is optimized in a way that is inclusive of individuals with disabilities, in addition to other variability. We also focus on multiple means of representation, so providing options for perception, making sure that things in the design of materials include customization of display, alternatives for audio and video, for example. And then action and expression, of course, we want to make sure that there are options for physical action. So that's where assistive technology and accessible education materials and accessible technology really shine in the UDL framework, and making sure that the procurement, selection, creation, whether these materials and technologies are procured at the system level, or whether it's teachers who have the freedom to select their own materials or select their apps, or whether materials are being curated through open educational resources, regardless of the source, that once it reaches the student, it is available for them to engage with, that has multiple representation, and there are means for action and expression that meet a wide range of needs and preferences. So that is really the way we embed accessibility within the UDL framework. And of course, it also has implications going down through right to making sure that we are we're fostering and nurturing expert learners.
Absolutely. So could you kind of walk us back here, and how can we apply this, or how is this being applied then in kind of the preparation of teachers or service providers?
So, I don't know, in my experience in teacher education, I worked on an OSEP funded Office of Special Education Programs funded project from 2008 to 2013. And the goal of that project was to really infuse UDL and culturally responsive pedagogy into both general education and special education pathways. really to ensure that regardless of a certificate or degree that the teacher educator was pursuing, that they had what they needed to support students with disabilities, whether it's direct service or whether it is, for example, in the content areas. What is it that math teachers need to know, social studies, science, history, language arts, etc. So I think the best model really does pay attention to looking at when it comes to teacher preparation and individual teacher responsibility is to have a clear model of what is it based on a role that educators need to know and to be able to do to support a student's use of assistive technology, whether it is at the depth of supporting the selection of that assistive technology, or whether it's ensuring that as a as a classroom teacher, and I use the word classroom pretty broadly in,
Sure.
in light of COVID and remote learning. But what is it that classroom teachers need to know to make sure that they are being responsive and agile, making sure that they are being proactive in the materials and technologies and the way those are used in the curriculum. So that is, I think, a lot of teacher education programs are really struggle with that. What is it that is that model of making sure that all teachers, all pre-service teachers, teacher candidates, you are situated upon leaving the program with what they need to know and be able to do to support both assistive technology and accessible materials, regardless of the setting that they're in. And then, of course, going into settings where those roles and responsibilities may differ as well. So making sure that we are being flexible in those expectations and providing both the in-service training in addition to that pre-service training.
Excellent. So with that in mind, are there particular innovations or particular resources that you feel are kind of particularly suited to facilitating this preparation of teachers?
So I would, of course, advocate for the AIMS Center resources. We have on our site, regardless of what an individual educator's role is, resources around how do you communicate with a vendor in the process of selecting materials and technologies. So if there are new teachers who really aspire to be part of curriculum committees, what is it that they need to know to inform the selection of accessible materials and technologies that are part of that curriculum? So what is it that they can contribute in a lot of systems that currently may not be considering accessibility? So to prepare new teachers to play part of that role, what questions to be asking. If they're creating their own materials, and again, whether this is going to be in a special education resource room setting or whether it's in a classroom setting, what are the skills that are needed to create accessible documents, websites, whether it's a Google site or whether it's going to be a site that is being created with WordPress. And then, of course, slide decks or any material that a teacher is going to be creating. How can we make that accessible for all learners? And then curating, going out and selecting. A lot of teachers have the liberty and the freedom to do that. What to look for around accessibility to make sure that it's perceivable, that it's operable, understandable, and robust, which we'd like to use the POUR model for. We think the POUR model is an excellent model around accessibility.
Yep, great. So it sounds like there are a lot of potential factors that can come into play. What do you think are some of the challenges that emerge when teachers are looking at this through the lens of accessible educational materials?
I think that there is a lack of common understanding of what accessibility means, which is understandable. Accessibility is a little bit different from availability, very different from availability. So for example, during the pandemic and the school building closures in the spring of 2020, there was a lot of talk about accessibility, making sure that materials and technologies are accessible for students who are learning remotely. And we were really trying to correct that language because really the more appropriate term for that would be available, making sure that students who are learning remotely have available to them broadband, that they have available to them their textbooks, the learning access to the learning management system or the portal that their teachers were using to provide curriculum during remote learning. So that is really the first step, making sure that there's equitable distribution of what's needed for for students to have access to the curriculum. But then beyond making it available, can all students use it?
Right.
Making sure whether it's English language learners who need in their families who need the materials in a different language, and students with disabilities who need their assistive technology, they need accessible formats, they need accessible built-in features, and everybody between. So the federal definition of accessible is that individuals with disabilities can acquire the same information, engage in the same interactions, and enjoy the same services as individuals without disabilities in an equally integrated manner and with
Mhm.
substantially equivalent ease of use. So we use that at the AIM Center as really our bar when we're talking about is it accessible, or really that federal definition of accessibility to distinguish from other means of making sure that materials and technologies are available for all learners.
Excellent. And out of that, do you have suggestions for potentially, people out there who are also doing research? Are there specific areas where you see a lack of research or where you think that more research is needed moving forward?
I think for for research for teacher preparation, we know that training around accessibility and assistive technology works. That where teachers have been well prepared, that that they that it does impact their educational practice once they're in the field.
Right.
But we also know that it's inconsistent, um, and I don't think we actually know specifically what works. What are the what's happening in those teacher education programs where there's more of an infusion of accessibility of materials and technologies. What is it that's being taught that actually transfers from the induction period, and then when teachers start in systems where maybe accessibility nor UDL are part of the part of the conversation. They may
Right.
not be part of the culture. So I think we need more research over what works, because accessibility is different from UDL.
Mhm.
As we opened accessibility, it should be embedded within a UDL framework. It's essential for individuals with disabilities, but we know that the same practices really are good and benefit all learners.
Sure.
So what's the distinction between UDL that may be part of a teacher education curriculum versus really embedding accessibility considerations for individuals with disabilities when it comes to considerations, for example, around poor, and making sure that perceivability, operability, understandability, and robustness is part of the curriculum decision-making process. So that would be, I think, a really important area. And where are those areas where, as I also opened in the beginning, where special education and general education preparation really are done in a way, an intentional way, where these skills are distributed across both, so that it's not just this information isn't just contained within the special education pathway, because we're just not going to get to a systems level approach to addressing accessibility in a way that is robust, that it's consistent, that it's high quality,
Mhm.
without everybody across the system really understanding their roles and responsibilities. And then what does that induction process look like going into a system? How is it that universities that are really doing well at training new teachers around accessibility and UDL, what are the bridges that can be made around induction to make sure that there are plenty of laboratories where new teachers can practice?
Mhm. I think those are all extremely important kind of areas of focus. Before we close, are there any specific um, resources or tools for anyone that would like to learn more about your work?
Sure. So if you go to our website, which is aim.cas.org, so that's aem.cas.org, there are a number of resources on our site. You'll see that our site is structured around a navigation menu at the top that is how to get started with accessibility, how to acquire accessible materials and technologies, how to create them, how to use them, and then how to coordinate with others. So we think that there's an individual responsibility around AIM, but really most impactfully is going to be the systems change. How can systems work together to coordinate around making sure that from the source to the student, accessibility is a consideration. So under our resources section, you will see we have a 5-part online module series that covers all considerations related to providing accessible materials and technologies and using them. So everything from really the procurement process for large scale procurement, learning management systems, whole curricula that may be digital. What are the considerations? And then down to the individual student level, what is the decision-making process? How do you determine that a student needs an accessible format, Braille, digital text, large print, tactile graphics? And then what are the pathways to acquiring those formats and coordinating with others? So we have our quality indicators for providing accessible materials and technologies, and that really does reach the system level leadership level. But we encourage everybody to be aware of those because along with it, we have an AIM pilot, which is a self-assessment and progress monitoring tool that supports states and districts with implementing the quality indicators in that coordinated systemic approach.
Excellent. And we will provide links to those resources on the blog as well so that people can easily find them. Well, Cynthia, I want to thank you very much for joining us today to talk with us about your work in accessible educational materials and standards and the promotion of UDL. We really appreciate it. Just in closing, for more information about CIDDL, research and practice briefs, and other resources for teacher education and related services, personnel preparation, please go to CIDDL.org. Don't forget to follow us on social media, subscribe to our channel, and leave us a message. Okay, so thank you all very much.